Administrator with the Carolyn Stark Real Estate Team. Thank you so much for joining us for our Home Edition event. Today we are so grateful to have Jeremy Otte with the Wisconsin Parkinson's Association with us. Parkinson's disease affects so many families, and his program today will focus on the basics and beyond. Now here's Jeremy.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Jeremy Otte of the Wisconsin Parkinson Association. I'm the Director of Outreach and Education. And today I was asked to talk a little bit about Parkinson disease. Today's presentation is called Parkinson Disease, the Basics and Beyond. I will go through a lot of different areas of Parkinson disease. Some of them may sound very similar to what you've seen with people with Parkinson's. Other things may be things you've never heard of before. Please take notes, follow along, and if you have questions at the end, my phone number and email will be on there. Please don't hesitate to give me a call or send an email if you have questions about anybody you care for personally or professionally with Parkinson disease. With that, I'm going to talk a little bit about who the Wisconsin Parkinson Association is. We are a statewide organization. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We were founded back in 1984. We saw a gap in Parkinson care and education for people throughout the state. So a small group of people and a physician in southeastern Wisconsin developed Wisconsin Parkinson Association. And over the last 30-some years, we've really changed from a group that was part of a national organization to our own independent organization. And what that has been great for us is everything we do in the state of Wisconsin stays in the state of Wisconsin, whether it's fundraising, every penny we raise stays here, it doesn't go somewhere else. But then it also allows us to be very adaptable to any programs or services. So we're able to look at things like when COVID happened and we really needed to look at how do we reach people without doing in-person programs. We were able to do that through webinars, direct Ask the Expert videos, and other virtual programs, whereas as a national organization, a lot of those I worked with, it was 9 to 10 months after COVID started before they were able to do anything. So that's what makes us very unique. As I said, we are located in Milwaukee, but we do cover the entire state of Wisconsin. Currently, we have over 200 support exercise groups throughout Wisconsin, everywhere from Racine, Kenosha, to Eau Claire, to Eagle River, and then a number throughout the Fox Valley area. And then our major goal as an organization is provide information, resources, and education about Parkinson's disease to enhance public education and awareness, which is what I'm doing here today. So we try to do these very often and provide as much information to professionals and people with Parkinson's disease. So the next slide is going to talk a little bit about the cause of Parkinson's disease. Really simply put, we don't know the cause. There is no specific cause that we've been able to identify at this time. There seems to be some genetic component, but we're not really sure what that genetic component is at this point. There's a commonality of certain gene mutations in people with Parkinson's disease, but the interesting thing in some of the studies has been those same mutations show up in people who don't have Parkinson's disease. So we're trying to figure out why it affects certain people differently, and there's about 7 different genes we're really looking at to figure out what that is. And then it also may be environment, what you're exposed to, whether it's high chemicals, fertilizers, and other things like that that may cause a higher incidence of Parkinson's disease. What you'll see with the slide I'm showing is Parkinson's disease affects an area in the brain called the substantia nigra. And why it's hard to diagnose somebody is if you look at the slide, the substantia nigra is in the middle of the brain. So if you look straight up from the bottom of your head to the brain, it's on that bottom side. It's very hard to see in an MRI or an X-ray. And even if we see it, we oftentimes don't see the bleaching of the substantia nigra. So when you look at the slide right now, there's 2 kind of butterfly-looking things on the right-hand side. The one on the top is the healthy substantia nigra. That blackness in the wings, if you will, that is dopamine production. And that is common in people with Parkinson's. Everybody has dopamine production. And for healthy brains, you will see that dark area where the dopamine is being produced and passed through the substantia nigra. If you look at the one right under it, you'll see it's very bleached out. There's not a lot of black there. And that is a Parkinson brain. That is where the dopamine's not being produced. And the hard part with Parkinson's disease is there's no point to really see when that bleaching or change is happening. It may be your symptoms start showing up when you've had 50% loss of dopamine, it may be 60%, it may be 5%. We don't fully know that yet, but this kind of shows you what that looks like. The hardest part about this is the only time we can ever look at the substantia nigra is when we've done an autopsy on a brain. So as you can see, it's very hard to diagnose somebody with Parkinson's disease because, again, we can't see this area until after death. Right now, the only way to diagnose Parkinson's disease 100% is a clinical exam. Very old-fashioned. You don't see that a lot anymore. Oftentimes we go to the doctor and we do x-rays and blood tests and everything else. You will still get those, and we're ruling things out. But with Parkinson's disease, they're just going to do a simple office exam. The doctors are going to observe a few things, and then they're going to look to diagnose Parkinson's disease. So with that, the next slide is going to talk a little bit about those 4 symptoms. When you go to the doctor, there's 4 things they're going to look for. They're going to look for tremor. They're going to look for rigidity or stiffness. They're going to look for something called akinesia, which is a slowness of movement. And they're going to look for postural instability, which may be a balance issue or maybe a gait issue. We'll touch on what all those look like right now. Tremor is one of the most common Parkinson's symptoms. It's one we all know and look for. The important thing to understand, though, is only 2/3 of people with Parkinson's disease will ever have a tremor. So if you have somebody who you care for, you know, who says, oh, I have Parkinson's disease, and you go, well, you never shake, the person probably never will shake because that's just not one of their symptoms. The other thing about Parkinson's tremor is it's a slow rhythmic tremor. So if you think of that, if you look at my hand when it's at rest and it gets a little tremor like that and it's very slow and rhythmic, that is commonly the Parkinson's tremor. It may get worse as the disease progresses. Somebody takes a drink of water and then all of a sudden their hand is really shaky trying to get water up, or maybe a spoon. That's common as the disease has progressed, but usually in the early time, it's very slow and rhythmic. The difference I like to really demonstrate is if you think of Michael J. Fox. You've seen him, there's been videos of him testifying at the Capitol and other interviews that he does. He has a very herky-jerky movement and he's constantly doing this. He actually has what's called a dyskinesia, which means his body is producing too much dopamine. And there's a really long story to that. He wrote a book. Basically, you tell a 20-some-year-old male who is a Hollywood actor that 3 pills a day will help treat his Parkinson's disease. As most 20-some-year-old males will do, he took 2 to 3 times that amount. And then what happened is his body got used to that massive amount of dopamine, and now he's at the point where he has to take those massive amounts to have movement throughout the day, and that's where those dyskinesias come in. Don't confuse that with tremor. If you see those disconnect movements, that usually means you're getting too much of the medication, whereas tremor usually is just not enough medication. We may up the medication as far as we can, and you're still going to see a little bit of a tremor on some people. Unfortunately, you kind of ride the balance. The doctor has to determine, I can give you a little more to get rid of the tremor, but then you're going to have dyskinetic movements, and those can be very exhausting and difficult to deal with. So a slight tremor may not be as difficult. The other thing I always try and tell people is consider your tremor. You're usually more aware of it than other people. The example I always like to use, if you go to the grocery store, you go to Starbucks, you go into a restaurant, I've always heard people with Parkinson's go, well, I'm worried everybody's looking at me. The reality is, everybody's looking at their phone. Nobody's paying attention to what's going on. They're staring at their phone. They're very often not paying attention to you. You're more aware of it than anybody else. And if you don't make a big deal of it, most people aren't going to. The last thing with tremor is it starts unilaterally. Usually it will start on the right side or the left side of the body. Maybe you'll see it in the right hand or the right leg. It'll happen both those. Eventually, as the disease progresses, you will see it in both sides, but upon first diagnosis, it's going to be very unilateral. The other place you may see it is in the face. You may see a little bit of a chin tremor. Occasionally the head will shake a little bit. And oftentimes with the chin, they aren't even aware that it's happening. So again, it's one of those, as a care partner or somebody who cares for them, you can really pick up on some of those and talk to them and talk to their doctor, because it may be a tremor they're not even aware of. The easiest way to get rid of a tremor is obviously medication. Holding something in your hand. I have a gentleman I work with who's a support group leader, and I tease him. I can always tell when he has tremor because he's either sitting on his hand, he has his hand in his pocket because it's not going to shake, or he's holding his pen or a phone or something like that because when the hand is not at rest, oftentimes the tremor won't happen. So that's tremor. Again, like I said, very common, but only 2/3 of people will ever have it. The next one we're going to look at is called rigidity or tone. And really what you're going to look like there is rigidity. It's going to be a tightness in the chest area, the neck, the chest, or the hip area. And if you're listening to this, I'm sorry, I just bumped the microphone. But it may be the hip area, and you'll see that where it's really difficult for them to turn once in a while. Instead of making a fluid movement like this to grab something, they may have to literally move their feet to turn to the side. With the shoulders, it may be just very stiff trying to grab things. And what they'll do within a doctor's appointment is they'll have them go at rest and they will move the arm and they'll have what's called a cogwheeling motion, is they will actually have some tightness or resistance in the chest area or the hip area that tells them that that may be a Parkinson issue. It's a hard one to see. You can't see rigidity, and it's a difficult one to explain. You know, my hips are tight. Well, all our hips are tight. Well, not really. And that's where it's a real difficult one. So again, the doctors will really look at that. They will do some things within a clinical exam that will help them identify that rigidity or tone issues. The next cardinal symptom, or one of the things we're going to look at, is bradykinesia. I always laugh at this slide. I didn't put the slides together. My communications director did, so it's a giant turtle. But it talks about slowness of movement. And again, it's a tough one because a lot of the Parkinson symptoms look like normal aging. But slowness of movement, you'll see they don't walk as fast as they used to. They don't react to certain things as fast as they used to. If they drop something, the reaction to grab it isn't there. I've heard people say, they may put their finger on a burner, and you and I do it, we touch it and we come off. Some other people with Parkinson's, they may touch it and may take a second or two to get that hand off. So it's just a general slowness. Again, it can be mistaken as, gee, we're getting older, we're slowing down in certain ways, but really it's a common symptom they're going to look for in Parkinson's disease. The way the doctor's going to look for it is a couple things they're going to do. They're going to have you sit in the clinic, they're going to have you take your 2 fingers and your thumb and tap them together as fast as you can. Seems pretty simple, seems pretty normal. For those of us without Parkinson's disease, we should be able to do this for quite a while, and it'll be the same tempo, the same speed, everything else, the same distance. Somebody with Parkinson's, usually within 5 to 7 seconds, it'll start looking smaller, it'll start looking very uneven or not in tempo or in rhythm, if you will, and it'll just look different. So you can see it's a slower movement versus a constant. We'll have them wave, and the hand may look like this instead of a fluid wave. And then the last thing doctors oftentimes will have them do is tap their heels or tap their toe. And what you'll hear, for me, if I do it, the toe tap's going to be pretty fast. You have a person with Parkinson's do it, the first 1 or 2 is going to be a nice toe tap, and then the third one is going to be you're going to hear the whole foot slapping because they can't keep that rhythm, that movement has slowed down quite considerably. So again, it's something we're looking at within a clinic. It's not something that's going to show up on an x-ray or blood test. It's something we're looking for within a clinical setting. For a Parkinson diagnosis, you're going to have 2 of those 3 symptoms I just talked about. You're going to have tremor, you're going to have rigidity, or you're going to have bradykinesia. You're going to have 2 of those 3. And that's what they're looking for to diagnose it. What we will find, and I'll talk about this maybe a little bit later, as we add medication to treat those, that will tell us if it's Parkinson's disease or if it's a whole different family called Parkinsonism, which is all the symptoms look similar, but instead of a lack of dopamine, it's too much dopamine being produced but not being taken to the body and causes other problems. So I said there was 4 symptoms though, and I've only talked about 3. The last one, and the one that is very common for almost everybody with Parkinson's disease, postural instability. And the way you're going to see that is they may have a bit of a stooped posture. People with Parkinson's, the way the substantia nigra feel, they feel like they're going backwards all the time. So oftentimes they will lean forward to compensate where they feel like they're going backwards. Where that gets to be a problem is if they lean too far forward, they may get a propulsive gait where they go fast forward. The only thing that stops them is the wall or whatever they trip over. It increases likelihood of fall. You get that nose over toes. Your center of balance changes, so you're more likely to go head first and fall, which is very dangerous and can be detrimental to people with Parkinson's disease or anybody in the elderly population. You may also see propulsive gait, which is they're trying to move, and all of a sudden you hear the feet kind of go, and then they take off. And it's kind of the body, the dopamine going, oh, I need to go to the feet and legs, and they're getting there, and they're kind of speeding up, and then they start walking. Again, that can be dangerous because, again, they get out ahead of themselves and risk an increase of falling. The other things we look for with postural instability, no arm swing. So if you watch them walk, go to the mall, watch silver sneakers or anything like that, people with Parkinson's, when they walk, one arm doesn't swing. So for most of us, when we walk, those arms swing to keep us in balance. Somebody with Parkinson disease, one arm will swing, the other one won't, and what you'll see is a foot will oftentimes drag. Because what you're doing is when you walk, you're using that to bring those feet in balance and keep yourself in balance. When you're not walking, that leg isn't coming up as high, and the heel or toe may catch in the dirt, and again, increase the risk of fall, increase balance issues, and a number of other issues that could be a problem. What we try to tell people is if you see that arm swing not happening, talk to them, because they may remember, oh yeah, start swinging their arms. There's programs they can do through exercise that remind them to swing those arms. So really watch for that. That's another important one. And then one more is freezing. It's one that is misunderstood a lot. Freezing is literally they get stuck in place. They're walking and all of a sudden they can't get moving. Oftentimes freezing will happen in very specific circumstances. Going through a doorway, getting onto an elevator, getting through that doorway, especially if there's a crowd, they get anxious, they freeze, and they get stuck. That can be a problem for obvious reasons. Changing surface area. I'm on carpet, I'm walking, I'm fine. All of a sudden it's a wood floor, and now getting from the carpet to the wood floor, my brain isn't telling me to go, so I can freeze there. Freezing also happens when there's anxiety. People behind me are in a rush, and now I freeze because I'm worried I'm holding people up or I'm going to get knocked over. But then I freeze and I'm literally stuck in place, and now my likelihood of getting knocked over has greatly increased. The best way to deal with freezing is talk to a doctor. You can meet with a physical therapist. There's a number of things they can do for freezing. The other thing is if you have somebody that you care for that freezes, don't make a big deal of it. If it's caused by anxiety, making a big deal about it doesn't make the anxiety go down. If you look at them and go, Mom, you always freeze. Why do you do this? That's not going to make anybody's anxiety get better. That's going to make it get worse, and then the freezing episode's going to last longer. Couple tricks you can do, talk about something else. They're frozen, let's not focus on that. Let's talk about, what do you think about the Brewers? How do you think the Packers are going to do? Hey, what about that play we just saw? Take their mind off of it. Other things you can do is count, just like dancing. On 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. On the next one, Mom, on 4, we're going to go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now all of a sudden they start walking. If you redirect what they're worried about, that will help them get moving. So that's where freezing can be an issue. It's something, the other tricks the physical therapist will teach you, you can use a laser pointer to walk with. Having that red light to aim for is great. Certain walkers you can build, they have that laser on the back, so you have that line to walk for. The one thing I will say, and it sounds funny when I say it, but listen, hear me out, the laser pointer is great unless you have a cat. We had a lady who did our program a couple years ago, and she said the laser pointer was great, but I've fallen more since I started it than beforehand, and it was because her cats kept chasing the light and running between her legs. Not an issue I'd thought of at the time, but something that I try to always share as a little caveat warning of, hey, this is the one place maybe you don't want to use that laser pointer because it can cause some problems. So again, I'm a quick review. The 4 main symptoms we're looking at: tremor, rigidity, akinesia or slowness of movement, and postural instability. For those who think like I do, remember TRAP: tremor, rigidity, akinesia, postural instability. Those are the 4 main things we're looking for. Those are the cardinal symptoms. Those are what the doctors are going to look for. And when they come to the doctor's office, they're going to test for those. So like I talked about, they're going to do this, they're going to do this, they're going to wave, they're going to move the arms and feel those. They're going to have them get up and walk 10 or 15 paces because they're going to look at how's the gait, is their arm swing, is the gait shuffled, or is it a steady gait? And then they're also going to look for tremor. And the hardest one is tremor. I can't You can't walk into a doctor's office and go, okay, shake for me. Most people, if they think about their tremor, it's not going to happen. So the little secret we have is when the doctor does this and you're focused on this, they have you put your left hand at rest, and if you have a tremor, that left hand will kick in. And they will see the tremor in the face area, the hand, occasionally the leg, so they will pick up if there's a tremor there or not. We also recommend care partners go to the appointments because they see things the patient doesn't see. You can tell them, yeah, this is what's happening now, but last week this was happening, and you can really help paint a fuller picture for the doctor to make sure the treatment options are fully appropriate for them. So those are the cardinal symptoms. Next, we're going to jump into the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. The thing that's interesting about the non-motor symptoms is oftentimes they will show up 5 to 7 years before diagnosis. But again, oftentimes we may confuse those with natural aging. One of the things I forgot to mention at the very beginning, Parkinson's mainly is a disease of people 62 and older. We've seen a rise in people under 60 being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, but primarily still about 2/3 of the audience of people with Parkinson's disease are 62 and older. So you can see how older age can mimic some of these symptoms, and it's easy to brush them off going, well, I got a little bit of a tremor, but I had too much coffee today. Well, of course I'm moving a little bit slower. I'm 75 years old. I'm supposed to move a little bit slower. It's when those things are abnormally slow or different that we really try to look at them for Parkinson's disease. So some of the secondary symptoms and the ones I'll touch on, the first one is hypophonia. And really what hypophonia is, quiet voice. So I saw a study a number of years ago that at the age of 28, our hearing starts to decline. There's certain tones we don't hear, certain things we don't pick up. I've actually done this. There was a TV show I watched with my kids once, and they were doing it and they were playing things at my age group. Like, if you're over this age or under this age, you can't hear this. And I kept listening and my kids were giggling and I'm like, they haven't played it yet. And they're like, yeah, Dad, they've been playing it for a while. Why that's important is if I'm 65, 68 years old and I have hypophonia, which is quiet voice, and my wife has hearing loss because we've gotten older and hearing loss happens, we don't have great conversations. So somebody with Parkinson's disease with hypophonia, they think they're talking at this volume and they actually think they're yelling. And the reality is they're talking at about this volume and they're really hard to hear. And now if my wife or spouse is hard of hearing, it makes those conversations very hard. I've joked many a times at a support group where they look and they go, yeah, the conversation usually is, what, huh, what, why don't you talk louder, why don't you listen? And you never get anything accomplished. So it's very important with hypophonia that if that quiet voice is happening, it gets addressed. You can meet with a speech therapist. There's a lot of techniques they can give you. The other one, and I'll use a trick a guy taught me 5 years ago from one of my support groups, make sure their hearing aids are up to date. He was the Parkinson patient. He didn't have his hearing aids up to date. He thought they were fine, but he couldn't hear himself. And when he got new hearing aids, he realized it was him, not his wife, who was having troubles. It was his voice. So the hearing aid made a huge difference in how he could hear himself more clearly, but he could also hear her more clearly. So really work on that. And what we usually tell people is once they go through the speech therapist, there's a program called LOUD, L-O-U-D, LSVT LOUD. And it's a program, it's 1 day a week, try that again, 1 hour a day, 4 days a week for 4 weeks. So they get 16 hours of class where they work on being loud and they actually monitor on a computer. And I've had people come in and like, here's the baseline, and they come in and talk as loud as they can and they're here. They're not even at a minimal volume. By the end of the class, they're up here. You ever want to really check it out, go to LSVT Loud's website. It's a national company out of Arizona. And there's a lady they show when she comes in, the first interview they do before she starts, her hair is kind of wetted down. She doesn't look like she wants to be there. And the whole interview is her going, well, I'm here because my husband thinks I need to be here, but I don't see it. She doesn't make eye contact. She talks very quietly. And she's just there because everybody else thinks she needs it and she doesn't see it. 4 weeks later, they interview her after the class. And before she even talks, you see a physical change in the woman. She's wearing a blazer, very nice shirt underneath. She has pearls. Her hair's done up. She is excited. You can see she's kind of bubbly in the chair. And as soon as they talk to her, she goes, yeah, my husband can't claim he can't hear me anymore. And she went into this and you could hear her clear and loud, and it makes a huge difference. It gives them confidence. And the other thing I always tell people is beyond the spouse conversation or beyond the care partner conversation, It's really hard to go out on a Friday night for a fish fry if nobody can hear you. You're sitting at a table of 8 people, there's music playing overhead, you're asking for the tartar sauce or the fries to be passed or whatever, and nobody can hear you because you have that quiet voice. Instead of fixing it, a lot of people socially isolate. That's the wrong thing to do. Get the voice fixed. That social interaction is so important for people with Parkinson's and as we get older. So definitely address the hypophonia as quickly as possible. The next one is masked facing. You'll see with the slides, this is a picture of Pope John Paul II. And towards the end of his popeship, he came out that he had Parkinson disease. And if you really watched him, you could see his one hand shake. You could hear it in his voice that it was really quiet, but he also had facial masking. And facial masking is a hard one because if you first meet somebody, facial masking means their face is downturned all the time. They look like they're frowning or they're upset. And this is really difficult because if I'm moving into an assisted living facility, people are going to think, wow, this is a really unhappy, unfriendly person because they're always frowning. The reality is it's part of the disease, and oftentimes they don't even know they're doing it. So be aware of the facial masking and look through the face, talk to the person. The old story Grandpa and Grandma taught us, don't judge a book by the cover. Definitely talk to the individual, find out what's going on, and oftentimes you'll realize that facial masking is just part of Parkinson's disease. The easiest way doctors used to identify this 10, 15, 20 years ago, whereas people would go to a family vacation and they'd come back and get the photos done, and Grandpa didn't smile in any of the pictures. And you're like, Grandpa, we thought you were having fun. He goes, I had a great time. And then you look at the pictures and there's never a smile. It was the facial masking. The face was downturned. It's just part of the disease. So again, watch for it. Be aware that the person may be the most pleasant, outgoing person. Their face just is going to look downturned like that because that's how the disease is affecting them. The next one, and I love saying this because I've learned these big words, neurogenic orthostatic hypotension. Basically what that means is, for most of us, when you go from a seated or lying position to a standing position, your body works in concert with you and the vessels in your body constrict to keep all the blood from rushing to your feet. It helps you keep a good pressure with your blood pressure. With Parkinson's disease, those vessels don't constrict and the blood goes down and they get very lightheaded. So there is a medication they can take that is specific for neurogenic orthostatic hypotension. But a couple of things that you can do that are very easy. You wake up at 3 in the morning, you got to go to the bathroom very bad. Sit up in bed, count to 10. Stand up by the bed, count to 10. You give your body a chance for that blood pressure to repressurize and get yourself a little more in balance, and now you can go with your likelihood of falling greatly decreased. But it's taking time. Don't wait till you have to void the bladder immediately. Give yourself time. Similarly, when you stand up from your chair to go to the kitchen to grab something, stand up, count to 10. And really just talk to them. If they're having this experience where they're getting kind of spots in front of their eyes or they feel a little dizzy, that means they're probably having this orthostatic hypotension issue, and there's ways to address it. And again, people don't always realize this is part of Parkinson's disease. The next one, the slide you'll see you can't read. It's called micrographia, and it's very common in Parkinson's disease. Remember we talked about this? Trying to write. Your hand gets really cramped up and small, and oftentimes what we would see with a Parkinson individual is, for myself, my name's Jeremy. Big J, big E, and then a bunch of scribble lines, because that's what my hand is allowing me to do, and that handwriting gets really small. A great way to look at this and kind of see maybe when did the symptoms start is if the individual with Parkinson's disease keeps the checking account. You can look at the ledger and start seeing when that happens. Now it's fewer and fewer that we see that nowadays. Most people are doing it all online, so we don't look at the check ledgers anymore. But that's a way you can really tell that that handwriting has become impacted. The hand gets really small, tight, the handwriting gets very difficult to read. I've heard many a patient joke with the doctor and said, hey, I can be a doctor now, nobody can read what I write. It's really important to kind of look at that, and there's exercises they can do. But nowadays, there's so many other technology tools we can work with them on that they can still write, whether it's an email, a letter, whatever it is they want to do, they can still do that through some of the voice software on their computer. And then they can print that out or send it as an email. There's a lot of ways they can still communicate, whereas a number of years ago, writing was the only way, and as your writing got smaller, it made it very, very difficult to do that. So there's a couple of other symptoms that I don't have listed here. One of them is loss of sense of smell. It's a very common Parkinson's thing that before diagnosis, the sense of smell changes. They don't smell the roses, they can't smell food cooking, their taste changes because the food is different. Obviously, during COVID time, that's a very difficult one to figure out, but it's a very common Parkinson's one we see because it does affect the senses with the nose and the throat and the swallowing. Another one is incontinence issues, and it goes both ways. They can't fully void the bladder, or they don't realize they have to go when they're supposed to and they have an accident. There's a lot of techniques we can do with them on that to work with those. And then constipation is a real big one. The medications we have can cause constipation. The medications for Parkinson's can cause constipation. So that becomes a great issue. There's actually some studies going that the constipation seems to show up before the Parkinson disease once in a while. So we're looking at studies, is there something in the gut that's causing some of the Parkinson symptoms? But again, it's something they can do. And if you go to our website, we have something called Power Pudding, which is just wheat bran, applesauce, and prune juice that you mix together in a concoction. You take a spoon a day, and it really helps with the constipation issue. And it's very low cost to do, and it's not dangerous to do. We always do warn people that if you do make that, you can make a week's worth and have it in your fridge. Make sure you tell the grandkids. You don't want them just sneaking in and grabbing a spoonful of grandpa's pudding. There can be some issues there for obvious reasons. A couple of other things, sexual dysfunction, very common from both sides. Again, really recommend they talk to their doctor on that. The ability to achieve an erection or climax can be an issue for the males. For the women, the climax and just loss of sexual interest can also be an issue. So definitely talk to the doctor about those. The primary thing is, if you have Parkinson's disease and you see some of these secondary non-motor symptoms happening, don't be afraid to ask your doctor about them, because there's 26 non-motor symptoms. I've only touched on a very, very few of them. There's 26 of them. So the odds are that one of your issues may be a Parkinson issue. So talk to your doctor about it, address it, and then figure out, is it Parkinson's disease? Is it normal aging? Is it, I just had a really bad Tuesday and that happens? The doctor will really help you kind of figure that out, work it out, and then figure out what the solution is. Is it a physical therapist? Is it a speech therapist? Is there something else they can do? There's oftentimes a lot of things, but if you don't tell them, they never know how to treat that because you haven't shared with them. And don't be embarrassed. These are all issues that are common in Parkinson's disease. Feel free to talk about them and find out what's going on. So to wrap up today, I'm going to touch on the 3 M's of Parkinson's disease: the motor, the mood, and the memory. I always say when I do this, these are misnumbered. Mood should be first, because the reality is if we don't fix the mood, nothing else we do matters. The example I've always used, when I first started at WPA a number of years ago, I shadowed a doctor, and we had 2 patients, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, who had exact same symptoms. And the first guy we came into, he had a significant tremor, and he was kind of had a little bit of movement going on, and he didn't look like the model of efficiency at this time. There were some medication changes they were going to make that would hopefully tie him in. But he walked in, and the first thing he said to the doctor, he goes, "Oh, I can't believe you've done this for me. This is amazing where I'm at." And basically talking to the doctor afterwards, found out that when the guy came in, his tremor was uncontrollable, his mood was very bad, his quality of life had really gone downhill, and by tweaking the medication, listening to him, asking questions, and adjusting the medications appropriately, we got the tremor where it was here, and my hope was the next time we saw him, that the doctor changing the med would get the tremor to here, that you'd barely even see it. But his attitude was great. He's like, "We are on the right road. I feel so much better. I'm different." His spouse who was with him said, "This is just a completely different man." It was really refreshing to see. Fast forward to the afternoon, we see a gentleman exact same age. We walk in, and the first thing he says to the doctor is, "When the hell are you going to fix this?" And I looked at the guy, and he's sitting ramrod straight. Nothing's moving, no shaking, no nothing. And the doc goes, "I'm sorry, what?" And he goes, "Well, seriously, this tremor." And if you looked, his pinky twitched just a little bit. And the doctor looked at him and said, "I don't know what we can do for you, because if I give you more carbidopa, levodopa, and I'll touch on that in a minute, we'll give you dyskinesias. We got the tremor as far as we can right now. If we give you more, we're going to cause other issues." And the guy was just not happy. He goes, really, if we don't fix this, I don't even know why I come to you. I'll have to find a different doctor. And the doctor's like, well, that's your decision, but I kind of have you where I can get you. And to me, the striking difference was the one guy, happy, really ecstatic that we're in the right mood. The other guy, nothing we did was going to make him happy. Nothing they did was going to make him happy because he was still mad that he had a chronic disease that he was diagnosed with. So that's where mood becomes really important. First, though, I will touch on the motor symptoms. The motor symptoms and medications. So we talked about the motor symptoms earlier: tremor, rigidity, slowness of movement, postural instability. The most important thing to know about Parkinson's disease is the drug is treating the symptoms, not the disease. The drug doesn't make the disease better. The drug doesn't make the disease lessen over time. We're treating the specific symptoms and making the symptoms better. We don't have a medication yet that treats the Parkinson's disease. Emphasis on yet, we're working on it. The most common drug you're going to see is carbidopa-levodopa. You may know it as Sinemet, but it's carbidopa-levodopa. It's a dopamine replacement. Almost everybody with Parkinson's disease is on carbidopa-levodopa. And basically what we're doing is they're getting it X times a day to replace the dopamine in the body. Everybody's different. Some people are taking it at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., noon, 2, and 5. Some people I know are taking it at 7 a.m., noon, and 5 p.m. It really varies from person to person. It depends on their symptoms and depends what other comorbidities they have going on. So really don't think, well, all my other patients are on this, so everybody's going to be a little different. The key I will tell you is if you work at an assisted living facility or a home health, the really important thing about these medications, if they're supposed to take it at 8, 10, 12, and 2, they need to take it at 8, 10, 12, and 2, not 7:30, 9:30, 12:30, and 2, because what you've just done is completely screwed up their day. The medication has about an hour and a half life to it. So if we wait till, we give them to it at 8, we wait till 10:30, basically what happens with those symptoms is I'm here, you give me the medication, I'm good, the medication starts to wear off, and now I want to get back to baseline by the time that next medication comes in. If you wait a half hour, I'm going to get under baseline, and you give me the medication, I'm barely going to get over baseline before my next dose is ready. So you can really throw somebody's Parkinson's day off by not giving the medications at the right times. So be very aware of that. I know state guidelines are you can give medications within a half hour of the time. Parkinson's drugs, if you do that, you can really screw up how the medication works. The flip side is I'm running late, so I give it to him at 8:30 instead of 8. The next nurse is running early, so we give it to him at 9:30 instead of 10. Now we've given him 2 doses, which is within an hour. He's going to have those really significant dyskinesias where he's not going to be able to sit still. It's going to wear him out. It's going to cause a lot of movement. I've had people who fall out of wheelchairs because of that. So be very, very careful and stay within those timelines to the best of your ability. The other thing you want to find out is how do they react to the medication around meals. Sometimes with about 15 to 20% of the people with Parkinson's disease, protein can slow the absorption of the medication. So if you know they're going to have a really big meal full of protein at noon, we may try to adjust their schedule that at 11:30 they take their medication so it starts to absorb before that mass amount of protein comes in. Or flip side, we wait till 12:30, so we move, we change the schedule just to help them get through the day so that the protein doesn't affect how the medication's absorbed and then how it helps them out. Again, I mentioned focusing on one symptom. The guy with the pinky tremor, focusing on one thing over the exclusion of others can be very counterproductive. The medication, we can maybe get certain symptoms better than others, but the key is focus on those that are getting better. With Parkinson's disease, and we talk about the motor symptoms, carbidopa-levodopa or Sinemet are the gold standards. There's a number of other medications they may get that supplement that. Always talk to the doctor about those if you have questions. Why are they taking certain meds? The other thing is, if the individual you care for has other diagnoses to go with the Parkinson's disease, make sure all those doctors are talking. I've seen oftentimes people with cardiac issues who get medications that actually counteract the Parkinson medications. Now the Parkinson's disease is getting worse, the cardiac issues aren't getting addressed, and there's a lot of bad things happening. If we work together and the Parkinson's doctor and the cardiac talk and make sure the medications aren't counteracting each other, it makes a huge difference. And oftentimes the patient's not aware. They just assume the doctors are talking, they know what they're doing, they're giving me all the right medications. For the most part, yes, but once in a while things slip through. So always ask those questions so you know which medications you should take, and never stop a medication without talking to the doctor. My next slide, we talked a little bit about mood. Parkinson's depression is oftentimes a very first symptom, and it's very common. Again, you're getting diagnosed in your mid-60s. Most people are looking forward to retirement, and now they've been told, hey, you have this disease that's going to impact your movement and mobility the rest of your life. Depression is very common. I think we've gotten better that people don't realize it's not because I'm not trying hard enough. It's just part of the disease, and it affects the brain. It affects the brain chemistry, and we know that's what depression is. The good news is we have developed some new medications that specifically target Parkinson's depression. Up until about 5 years ago, all the medications, what they would do is they would serve as dopamine blockers. So they would help with some of the depression, but they would also slow down the dopamine production. So the depression got better, but the Parkinson's symptoms didn't do so great. Well, now we've developed some medications that totally bypass that system and do not impact the dopamine at all, but really help with the depression. So talk to the doctor about that. And the mood will make a huge difference. If you can treat that mood, it's a great thing. I always share a story. One of my best friends' mom was diagnosed with Parkinson disease. Got her to see a doctor I knew in the Milwaukee area. And she, within 2 minutes of the first appointment, the doctor goes, "How long have you been depressed?" And she cried, and she said, "I've been depressed since my husband died 18 years ago, but nobody's ever asked me. Nobody's ever addressed it. It's obviously been there, but nobody has addressed it." Well, he addressed it, and he gave her some medications for it. And without even doing anything for her Parkinson's disease, just by addressing that and taking that weight off of her and adding some Parkinson depression medications, her symptoms got better because she felt better. She felt heard. She felt engaged. So it's really important to address it, talk about it, be aware of it. Especially this past year, I've been getting a lot of calls at our office the last 6 months of people saying, "Man, my mom and dad, they're really depressed. They're socially, they're having issues. Physically, they're having issues." I'm like, yeah, they've been cooped up in a house for 14 months. It's very common that that's going to happen. So doing things we can to get them active and engaged. The slide I have now talks about it. Get active, get engaged. Go to bridge club, go to Silver Sneakers, exercise, yoga, tai chi, do something. Get out of the house, do some things. Even if you don't feel comfortable going to a class right now, go walk in the park. Just get out and get active and spend time with people. Have that interaction. Because what you're going to see is mood's going to get better, your voice is going to get better, your overall well-being is going to get better, and exercise is the only thing we know of that slows Parkinson's disease down. So if you can get them to exercise 3 times a week and do max velocity at 30 minutes in those 3 times, it will actually slow the progression of Parkinson's disease. So getting them out, getting them active, and doing things. It doesn't mean they have to go to the Y and lift, do bench press and try and set world records. It's going to some of the exercise classes. There's rock steady boxing, there's dancing classes, there's regular exercise, there's yoga. There's a lot of options they can do. And again, all those are on our website, wiparkinson.org. And then my final slide is memory. Some, but not all people with Parkinson's will have cognitive issues. One of the things to remember, we talked earlier about slowness of movement. It's also slowness of thought process. The brain slows down, trying to grab that memory. So give them time. Ask them a question. Today's society, we want everything now. We want everything yesterday. Well, if you ask a question, let them think about it. Give them time to actually answer it. And we may misinterpret that, oh, they have cognitive issues. Well, the reality is you just didn't give them time to answer. They knew it. It just takes them a second to get it. The way I use it as an example for people is, for some of us who are over 30, think back to our first job. You still had a Rolodex, right? The Parkinson's brain is a Rolodex. They're flipping through that Rolodex. They're looking for me, and they're going, is it J for Jeremy? Is it O for Otte? Is it W for WPA? Is it P for Parkinson's? Where do I have that memory saved? Nowadays, the non-Parkinson's brain, it's the smartphone, right? I can pick up my phone and say, call Jeremy, boom, everything shows up, and I can do that immediately. So give them a moment. It may seem like forever in today's day and age, but it's probably only 3 or 4 seconds, but give them a chance to do that. Parkinson's dementia can happen. It's about 15 to 20%. The interesting statistic to me is if you go online, you will find an organization that says 90% of all people with Parkinson's disease have dementia. And then you'll see a flip side where it says 11% of all people with Parkinson's disease have dementia. So I call it the cable hours. Somewhere between noon and 5 will show up. Between 10 and 90, most of the data shows it's about 15 to 20, but the risk does increase as they get older. And that's where it's important to see a doctor, Parkinson's doctor, and a neuropsychologist to do some baseline. Is it cognitive issues? Is it dementia? Or is it normal aging? And trying to figure out that, they're just not as, they're a little more forgetful than they used to be. So it's a lot of things that go into that, but you really look at it and make sure it's diagnosed properly. So that's my final slide. Again, my phone number and everything's on here. Again, Jeremy, WPA. You can email me at jeremyo@wiparkinson.org, or you can call our main number, 414-312-6990. We're always there to answer questions between 8:30 and 4:30, Monday through Friday. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you have questions, like I said, please email me or give me a call. But thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Stark with the Carolyn Stark Real Estate team here with Berkshire Hathaway. I just want to say thank you to Jeremy for the great presentation, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today.